and welcome to episode 2436 of Effectively Wild, a FanGraphs baseball podcast brought to you by our Patreon supporters. I'm Meg Rowley of FanGraphs, and I am joined by Ben Lindbergh of The Ringer. Ben, how are you?
Well, today's sign of the AI slot-pocalypse. You ready for this one? This is hot off the AP wire.
Oh, no.
Major League Baseball players have agreed to let a tech company create AI characters of themselves that can chat and interact with fans. Under an agreement announced Thursday between Genies and MLB Players Inc. It's another example of, something you can't put back in the bottle, I guess.
Right, yeah. Like, what are we... What's
just call it Pandora's
plan,
box.
Babe,
so,
for that name?
Yeah. The agreement between Genies and MLB Players Inc., the business affiliate of the Players Association, AI avatars of top stars will be created that can have conversations with fans. Each avatar will reflect a player's voice and interests. I wonder what that means.
Mean?
So, like their interest in baseball or their other interests, like AI Mike Trout just gives you the weather forecast. Genies will have, this is good. Genies will have the ability to charge for chat interactions, in-app experiences, and digital goods. The company could not say which players will initially be available as avatars. We couldn't say. Who could say? I guess they can't say.
This is terrible. Okay, so first of all, it can't have a conversation with you. It's an AI. It's not a person. It's a chatbot. You know how satisfied you feel when you have like one billing question for your health insurance and you end up screaming at your own computer because, my God, why can't I just talk to a real human person?
Sure.
It's like that, but like, hey, why you throw the cutter that way?
Yeah, and you can pay for it.
Why would you?
Better.
Why? Oh, Ben, we are doomed. I mean, I don't want to be pessimistic about the state of human affairs, but I do worry that we are doomed. They really named it Genie. They named it
Genies. Not just one, multiple Genies. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is a sign of the coming apocalypse.
Well, you know that this slop will be smut. That
this
people
is exactly
will
what I was
try
gonna say.
to make the players be horny.
Why would you write it like what you're doing is turning big leaguers into like a cam girl? I mean, and I don't mean any disrespect to the cam girls, to be clear. Like you do your business. Like that's not a living. Yeah, I'm not here to shame. That's not. I just don't think that that's what these guys probably want. It's going to happen immediately. It's not like how long does it take? It's like how dirty is the first question that they get? You know what I mean?
Yes, I'm sure they will attempt to build in some safeguards, but people always find a way around those safeguards almost immediately, seemingly. So it's going to get weird for sure. And I don't know if this is just like players are tired of talking to us on the podcast. They'll just send AI Brent Rooker to talk to us next offseason. No, he would never. He enjoys talking to us so much. But really, I don't know. I mean, everyone else is cashing in on this nonsense. So I guess get yours, but also don't, because like, why would you? How much could this possibly, is this worth it to you? We don't have the numbers here, but there would have to be just an enormous payout to even make me consider selling my soul to do this. It can't possibly reflect well on you. I say this now and then check back in 3 months and I will have developed an unhealthy attachment to AI John Brebbia and we'll just be chatting late into the night.
There will be a story about how you have decided you need to marry AI John Brebbia.
Yeah, we've all seen the Black Mirror episodes. We've all seen her. We know how this goes, right? And yet, even though we've seen it in sci-fi so many times, we are still plunging full speed ahead. So as far as I know, MLB and the Players Association innovating in this space. Maybe this has happened in other sports and leagues, but I don't really recall hearing about it. Anyway, sure this will just go great and it will all be wonderful. And this will be the last time that we ever talk about it because it will just be such a smashing success.
What would it be charging you for?
I guess once you get so attached to AI John Brebbia that you can't live without him, it's just like...
To continue the conversation, please deposit 25 cents.
Yeah, basically. Mm-hmm. Or... I don't even want to think. I mean, now we're really verging onto OnlyFans territory, in-app experiences, digital goods. I'm sure it's all perfectly PG.
These gentlemen are busy with other stuff. And I know that this is AI, poor John Brebbia is like, how am I at the center of this?
Yeah, the company could not say which players will initially be available. I doubt John Brebbia is number one on the list. Also, like, what will this be trained on, I wonder?
Right.
Because if it's supposed to reflect, okay, their voices are out there, sure, if you want to do synthetic
interviews.
AI. Yeah, is it just like their post-game, when they hit the game-winning homer?
God.
Are we pre-programming in generic interests? Do the players have to like divulge personal details? Are they signing up to actually try to make this thing sound like them? This is just so weird and so strange.
Boy, I just,
Well, in similarly weird but less dismaying news, I got an email from the Blue Jays about their promotions and event schedule. I don't know why I'm on that mailing list, but other must-have items it lists. Addison Barger couch t-shirt, April 11th. And it's just a t-shirt. It's not a couch. It's not like a bobblehead of him on the couch. The first 15,000 fans will get to wear, as if this is a privilege, will get to wear a photo of Barger tucked under the covers on the couch while using his laptop. Would you want to wear that, even if you were charmed by this story? And we talked about it plenty, but would you want to bear a t-shirt emblazoned with the image of Addison Barger using his laptop in a couch in David Schneider's room before Game 1 of the World Series? At least it's not AI Addison Barger, I guess, but I don't know that I would want to sport this on my person.
I have a lot of jokes, and I think that like none of them are. Sometimes you have to think to yourself, hey, I'm in the BBWAA. I might need to have a conversation with Addison Barger at some point.
The real one, not the chatbot.
Honest to goodness, Addison. Mm-hmm. What audio do I want to exist of me discussing Addison Barger if I have to talk to Addison Barger? Yeah. And I think I'm going to let that sort of be my light here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm going to not make any of the jokes I want to make, but simply say, no, I don't think that's a t-shirt that I would want to wear. I think that would be a no for me.
Limited quantities, first come, first serve, I guess, 15,000 only. Sure, it will be just huge on the secondary market. They'll all be on eBay immediately. Just the scalpers just selling the Addison Barger couch.
I just think that, no.
Okay.
No, I'm not going to.
Very judicious. Prudent. We will move on, and we should anyway, because we have a lot on the docket today. Namely, we are embarking for the 14th time on the Effectively Wild season preview series. Once more, onto the breach, and we are beginning with the Houston Astros and Chandler Rome, and the Arizona Diamondbacks and Nick Piccolo. And what fortuitous timing, because we can close the book on Framber Valdez's Astros career. We'll talk about his new career in just a second. And crucially, we can cover that Carlos Santana signing. We can get to all that latest big news headlines from the Diamondbacks. So we'll do that. And as outlined last time, and as we've done for years now, we do all 30 teams, 2 per pod, 15 pods. We will finish before opening day. We go in terms of the projected win totals as of the beginning of this week. We won't adapt them as those projections change as the spring goes on. And we have a rough schedule. We typically don't announce it beforehand because sometimes we deviate from it just based on availability or whatever else. So we will typically give you a heads up about who's coming next at the end of each episode. And it won't be wall-to-wall previews. It won't be nothing but previews. All previews. We will have some
even all previews.
Or that. We will have some non-preview pods sprinkled in there for changes of pace. But as usual, 14th time that we have done this, and we will give you a good primer for opening day and talk to people who are covering these teams. And of course, at this early stage, it is easier to schedule these conversations, but the people we are scheduling with, it's easier because they're not in camp. Right. And pitchers and catchers mostly haven't reported and games haven't started. So the insight is somewhat limited in terms of just being in person on the scene and having talked to everyone. But we will do the best we can. And most of the big baseball business for the offseason is done. And a big part of it got done just in time for us to talk about it. We will not be talking about Isaiah Kiner-Falefa to the Red Sox. We will not be talking about Miguel Andujar to the Padres. Still kicking around Miguel Andujar, who know because we've got bigger free agents to fry and bigger Frambers to fry, and two big contracts to lefties for the Detroit Tigers to talk about. Because we also have some resolution on the arbitration case of the century, or at least the season, Tarik Skubal. So maybe we can start with Skubal, because this was a pretty momentous case. We don't typically lead with arbitration hearing resolutions, but this was a biggie because of the giant gap between the figures that the team and the player filed. Tigers said, we will pay you $19 million. And Tarik Skubal said, you will pay me $32 million. And the arbitrators decided that Skubal gets his figure. It's either or. They couldn't just go down the middle. And Skubal gets his way, and he will make $32 million this year. After winning his hearing, he is setting new records across the board. He will have the highest salary for an arbitration-eligible player by $1 million, topping Juan Soto's previous high, and will just blow by the previous max annual salary for a player who actually was awarded that salary from a panel, which was $19.9 million, and that was David Price way back in the day for the Detroit Tigers. And the Tigers filed a little bit below how much Price made more than a decade ago. And he will also set a record, or double the record for a raise for an arbitration-eligible pitcher. So it's pretty huge. He more than doubled the previous record raise. And so this is, I was going to say, one small step for Skubal, one giant leap for player kind, but it's not a small step for Skubal. It's a gigantic leap for Skubal as well. But he did it not only to enrich himself, but there was an aspect of wanting to do it for other players too. And the Players Association was quite involved with this. MLBPA Deputy Executive Director Bruce Meyer provided the rebuttal in the hearing, somehow finding time to work on Skubal's case in and around arranging the Genie's deal for LLM chatbot Skubal.
Would imagine that Bruce didn't have his hand in that one, but
perhaps not. But Skubal is active in labor issues and obviously wanted to raise the ceiling. And the reason he was able to do this, as we previewed when we talked about this before, is this little known, seldom used, seldom able to be used provision in arbitration that allows players who have 5+ years of service and a quote unquote special accomplishment, and back-to-back Cy Young Awards clearly qualifies. So he was not bound by previous arbitration salaries. He did not have to go by the precedents and the comps and just say, you should pay me this much because this guy made this much in arbitration. He could compare himself to anyone, any major league player, which meant that he could build his case around starting pitchers whose salaries in some cases have exceeded $40 million. And if you can do that, if you can compare yourself to anyone, and also you're better than everyone, from a performance standpoint, then you can kind of see why it went Skubal's way.
It's a pretty remarkable ruling. The piece of this that I find the most sort of surprising is that, and granted, part of my surprise is predicated on taking the reporting around what Boris said here sort of at face value, but that, we know the Tigers to be a file and trial team, however much that particular bit of phrasing might rankle, because they don't go to trial, they go to hearing, and I'm annoying at parties, but that there was not a more sort of fruitful effort to negotiate leading up to the actual hearing, and that Skubal's side was the side that was reportedly sort of willing to continue those conversations, and that the Tigers were not. I try very hard not to sort of take issue with any individual player choosing to sign a pre-arbitration extension, choosing to settle in advance of a hearing. There are a lot of reasons that players do that. I think that when you're offered life-changing money and you have obligations to yourself and your family and maybe other people in your community, that makes a lot of sense. And some of those deals are not bad, that it's not like the players getting worked. But I do think there's like a social labor good to participating in the process, particularly when you have an opportunity to raise the floor. And so I think it's good as a sort of counterweight to all the settlements we see, all the pre-arb extensions that sort of take guys out of that process entirely and therefore don't put them in a position to sort of move the needle on the comps that are available, to have someone like Skubal say, no, I'm not only am I going to participate in this, but I'm going to be aggressive. When we talked about it initially, I was a little less offended that the Tigers sort of offered what they did, but I am surprised that, considering that there were conversations between Skubal's camp and the team prior to filing, that they didn't have a better sense of where he would land in terms of the number that he would write down on the card. I mean, I'm sure he didn't write it down, but that his people would write down on the card and sort of exchange. So maybe there's some work that they should do internally to think about their process around ARB. But it's fascinating. Like, I think it is good for labor that this comp now exists in the pool. I don't know how many players are going to be able to sort of readily avail themselves of it, because there aren't a lot of pitchers pre-ARB, ARB, or free agent that are like Tarik Skubal. That's kind of the point, right, of him getting this number.
Right.
I don't know that there were going to be a lot of guys who go through that process and are able to say, well, Skubal got $32 million, so I should get $32 million, or I should get 90% of $32 million. You know who's probably the happiest person? Let me rephrase. You know who's the second happiest person on the planet today? Is probably Paul Skeens. If I'm Paul Skeens, I am sending Tarik Skubal a little present, or like a fruit basket, a thank you card, something. Because if there is anyone in the existing pre-free agency player population who I could think of as really benefiting from this comp, it's probably him.
Yeah.
So I'm sure Paul Skeens' people are like, hell yeah, that's great. Way to go, Scoobs. I also will be really interested to see, this is a little more like getting down to brass tacks on the Tigers' part, but like they have said that they are not going to trade Skubal regardless of the outcome of this hearing. I wonder if that will remain true, because the timing of the Framber signing with his arbitration hearing is, one could raise an eyebrow if one were inclined to raise an eyebrow, if one were sort of eyebrow raising inclined.
Yeah, because Framber was the last top 10 type free agent still out there, and he was just dangling all offseason, and they chose to sign him, or they ended up signing him on the day of the hearing, after the hearing, but before the result of the hearing was announced. And so, yes, if they're willing to pony up and keep both of them, then good for them that they took the plunge on Framber before they even knew how much they would be on the hook for with Skubal. That's assuming that what transpired in the hearing room didn't make it very clear which way things were going to go. Maybe they actually had some sense of what the paycheck to Skubal would be. So yes, I hope, and I think, but also I hope that they have just decided that why not both, that they're going to go with two top of the rotation lefties. I guess there can be only one rotation topper on a team, but each of these guys is capable of topping some rotations and many of rotations. So that's good and needed and admirable, because continuing a trend, the Tigers were one of the teams that we talked about recently when we said who had sort of a disappointing, inactive offseason, maybe could have done more, was in a position to do more. We listed the Tigers. Well, one good way to get out of the doghouse there is to sign Framber Valdez, assuming that you also do keep Tarik Skubal. And yeah, there's been reporting suggesting that they will. And I always thought they would. And, if they get off to a terrible start or something,
right. I'm sure they could at the deadline. Yeah.
Yeah, they could entertain offers there, but they're less likely to get off to a terrible start if they have Framber Valdez. So that rotation now projects to be the second best in baseball.
Yeah.
Right after the Red Sox. It's, separated from the Red Sox projection in the depth charts at FanGraphs by 1/10 of a win, but ahead of the Dodgers. It's a much stronger group because you start with Skubal, obviously, doesn't get much better than that. But there's a lot of uncertainty elsewhere in that rotation. Right. Just, it's Flaherty, Mize, Reese Olson, Troy Melton. I just blended Olson and Melton somehow. Drew Anderson. There are a lot of guys, but almost everyone, it's a huge step down from Skubal, but it's a lot smaller step down. Talking about small steps again from Skubal to Framber Valdez. And because we happen to have Chandler, who has been covering Framber Valdez for years and watching him and seeing him pitch firsthand, we are about to ask him about the way that Framber's offseason played out and what kind of guy he is and what teams can expect from him. But clearly, just a huge addition for the Tigers that I think cements their status as the favorites in this division they weren't already.
And we can maybe talk here about some of the particulars of Framber's deal, like the
trampoline contract. And I think that if you're looking for a reason to take at face value the idea that they will not trade Skubal barring sort of a collapse like we talked about, although it's a bunch of very rational people. And so there's a lot of beep bop boop that goes on in every front office. But if you're the Tigers, do you believe a first half collapse? Aren't you just like, yeah, good point.
What is splits? What do we even make of these here splits, right?
Yeah, that'll come up later on this episode. You're right, though.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. Maybe we have some weird magic going on or curse. We're not clear what direction. I guess curses are magic, but not all magic is curses. It's sort of like a square rectangle situation. But I think that when you think about how Framber's contract lines up, let's assume that they hold on to Skubal and they don't have any intention of trading him, barring being in a really unenviable playoff spot come the deadline. He's still a free agent after the end of the season. Now, they're not precluded from re-signing him, but I think that the consensus, particularly given the sort of dearth of good free agents, is that he is going to get a haul. Mm-hmm. With the usual caveats we apply of not knowing exactly how a potential lockout will affect that. The last time guys signed big deals right before the lockout, so who knows? So, Skubal's going to be a free agent, and the way that Framber's deal is structured is it famously has, the ability for him to opt out, but to opt out after the 2027 season. This is in a 1 year.
3 years, 115. Opt out after 2027, $20 million signing bonus, some amount of deferred money.
Right. Yeah. So the AAV will be a little bit lower. And so, but he, assuming we have a full slate of games, will be in position to just slide into the number one spot for them in 2027 if they aren't able to re-sign Skubal. So I think that the sort of best version of this deal is one where Skubal is still around for year one. I mean, that's true regardless if he's the best pitcher in baseball, but I think that there is such nice sort of compatibility between that, and then they get this year of presumably good Framber when they might really need him to be the dude at the top of that group. Mm-hmm. So I like it. We talk in our conversation with Chandler about some of the makeup stuff that, may or may not have impacted his market, but I struggle to think of a better sort of pitcher to manager fit given Hinch's familiarity with Framber, so I think it's a really nice fit. And given how long he stayed on the market, I think he did pretty well for himself here. He's 32. I think that given the ways in which his profile was a little bit clouded, although I think, he was still a consensus top free agent, pretty good here. So how about that?
Yeah, no, few pitchers, few starters, more durable, more consistent than Framber over the past 4 seasons at least. Yeah, I mean, superficially, he's not coming off his strongest season, but under the hood, more or less.
Still a 4-win player.
Yeah, same old Framber, basically, you know.
Yeah.
You can count on him, Energizer Framber. So now the Tigers will benefit from that. And yeah, it's a lot of money going to lefty starters that was not really on the books before yesterday and now is. But also, yes, they might just have Skubal for 1 more year. They might have Framber for 2 more years. It's a lot in terms of AAV to take on, but it's not a lot in terms of total commitment. So
yeah.
Good for them for making the move. I feel bad. I pity Pirates fans even more than usual because in the hours just before the Tigers signed Framber,
they really want you to know they're trying, man. They want you to know so bad.
A preemptive "we tried." Ken Rosenthal came out with a story. Pirates emerge as aggressive suitor for Framber Valdez. And I thought that was weird when I saw it because we were just talking about how imbalanced the Pirates are pitching batting wise. And it would be weird if they finally splurged on someone and it were another pitcher. But I would have still said good for you for spending on someone. But no, of course, probably Pirates fans didn't get their hopes up too high. And if they did, they were very quickly dashed. But the turnaround there from headline and rumor to, we actually have a deal here. And no, it's not the Pirates was sort of amusing, but also sort of sad if you are a Pirates person.
I don't want to overstate my insider status by any means, but I was having conversations with folks prior to the Framber signing about how the market was heating up, and like a lot of names were offered up in terms of potential team fit. So my sense is that this was kind of all over the place, but I don't know how close. Let me put it this way. My sense, and again, I don't want to overstate my bona fides here, but my sense is that like they were much closer to maybe signing Eugenio Suarez than they really ever were to signing Framber Valdez. But I do think they tried in both cases. They might have entered a new condition where there is sincere effort and they are bumping up against the reputation that they have cultivated in terms of a commitment to winning. And so I think that to the extent that there is sincere effort, that is a positive step forward. But now Pittsburgh might be entering that danger zone where what you really need is a willingness to overspend.
Yes, which is not something Bob Nutting is known for.
I don't think we're quite there yet, which doesn't mean that there isn't effort being expended on the part of the front office to try to get some of these guys. But you might need to do a Cano at some point where you're just like, screw it, we'll bid against ourselves. We really need this guy to come here.
Okay, and last note, it's been a rough week for media and sports media specifically. And sadly, we could say that about many weeks, but this week in particular, obviously, most notably with the Washington Post laying off about a third of its newsroom, including the entire sports desk, a storied sports desk shutting down. There were also some other announcements, MLB.com layoffs, and just various things just kind of coinciding. Even Sam and Grant and Andy's podcast kind of twisting in the wind at The Athletic, as Grant mentioned on Blue Sky on Wednesday. And look, it's just a super unstable industry and has been for a while. And that just is getting worse in all ways, partly because of everything being chatbots, but not entirely because of that. In this case, clearly a lot of self-sabotage happening with the Washington Post and an owner, of course, who would barely have felt the impact of continuing to employ these fine people whose livelihoods he took on when he purchased that paper and then sort of sank with some of his strategic decisions over the past year or so. So I lament that, and our thoughts go out to all of the people who've been laid off. And I don't even know what we will do for our Nationals preview segment. Not that this is about us, but just, that's one minor manifestation. When I drew up the schedule for team previews last week, I assumed that we would be talking to a Nationals beat writer from the Washington Post, as we typically do. Well, now there's no such thing and no such person. I mean, the people still exist. They're just not doing that right now. So I hope that that these people will catch on somewhere, somehow. And I'm sure many a Substack will be started, many a newsletter, which is just the general fragmentation of media. I mean, cling to any life raft you can, of course, but it gets tougher and tougher for any one person to support all of these people, to access all of their work. So the work just gets more and more paywalled and siloed, and that has its downsides too. So just a really rough week for a lot of people. So our thoughts are with them.
Yeah, you want to have like something profound to say and you kind of don't, because we've gone through so many of these. The Post feels particularly galling just because like the entire operating budget of that paper is a rounding error for Jeff Bezos. You have to have a sort of weaponized degree of indifference to what you're doing, or I think maybe more likely a very clear understanding of what you're doing
yes.
and it working exactly the way you want it to. But, I am sad and angry for friends and colleagues of ours who do very good work and do not deserve to lose their jobs. I'm sad for the people who relied on the Post as their local paper. It wasn't just the sports desk, although that obviously has the most direct impact on this podcast, but they took huge cuts to their Metro section. They shuttered their book section. They had foreign correspondents in Ukraine who got laid off. How do you even organize that Zoom call as an aside? And how are you making sure that person gets out? So we are, I think, every day less and less well-informed by design. And I think that has devastating consequences for us as sports fans on the sort of low end of the overall impact, and for us as citizens on the high end. And that really sucks. So I don't know. I agree with you that like grab whatever life raft you can, but I hope that people appreciate some of this work needs to be done with the backing of an institution like the Washington Post. And that's true in the sports section. It's not like there aren't deep investigations where it really helps to have indemnification, where it helps to have really good First Amendment lawyers on your side. But some of the work that gets done at big papers like this is facilitated by being able to be bold, in part because that when the person in power that you're going after invariably comes to you with a subpoena, that you're able to say, my lawyer's right there. So some of this work just can't be done as bravely as the reporters who do it want to, because they are rightly afraid of the potential litigation that might follow. So
or just the months and the resources it takes to do investigative journalism well. And if you have to constantly be cranking something out because you hung up your shingle and you need to drive subscriptions, it just doesn't really afford the luxury of taking that time to dig deeper. So it's tough. I mean, people pitch in where they can and they sign up to support people, but it's hard for independent media to function the way that a gigantic newspaper can. And, people joke about, what if you just bundled all of the newsletters together and then you would have a newspaper? Yeah, maybe that's a radical idea. It's like people joking about, reinventing the cable bundle, basically, because you're just subscribing to X number of streaming services. But yeah, it's really hard to just have a one-to-one replacement. And of course, the economic model has changed in some ways that are just, some of them are actively just sort of sabotage, and some are just probably beyond the power of really anyone to head off. And you just have to kind of roll with the punches. And, you and I have been fairly fortunate in remaining employed at the same places for a number of years. And you just can't count on that in this business. Not that media is unique in that respect. Obviously, we're just the ones who talk about it all the time because we do podcasts and write about it. But many other people are dealing with that sort of uncertainty. And
I look at our Patreon exit surveys. I know the tilt. It's people who are losing jobs and want to subscribe, but just have to cut costs because they're in a different spot financially than they thought they were going to be.
Yes. And not that I want to parlay other people's layoffs into a funding drive for us, but it really is very valued and appreciated that we just don't have to have that sort of uncertainty doing this podcast. I mean, I guess FanGraphs dark overlord David Appelman could pull the plug tomorrow if he wanted to, but he would never. But we're independently funded by people who listen and support, and that's the only way that you're not just sort of subject to the whims of some billionaire or some tech titan or
gambling ads
or that. Yes, right. So thanks to all of you for supporting us so that we can do a 14th annual Effectively Wild season preview series, and we can actually survive and hopefully thrive for the duration of that time. There are downsides to everyone having to just put up their Patreon or whatever it is, but we are very grateful that since we have done that, you have supported us. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Let's take a very quick break, and we will be back with Chandler Rome to talk about the Astros, followed by Nick Piccoro to discuss the Diamondbacks.
Effectively Wild, where we can talk about Ohtani all day long. Effectively Wild, Ben and Nick on a like you know it's gonna be a good time. I wanna learn about new statistics. I wanna hear about none of them RBIs, yeah. Tell me about some prospect I should know about. Effectively Wild. Effectively Wild. Effectively Wild. Effectively Wild.
Well, we are joined now by the Houston Astros beat writer for The Athletic and the co-host of Crush City Territory, Chandler Rome. Welcome back, Chandler.
Hi, Ben. Hi, Meg. This is interesting to be hitting leadoff.
I know. You got to have a solid PA podcast appearance. Just let the guys behind you see some questions, the guests behind you who will be following you, see what sort of stuff we have in this year's preview series. Just make us work a little bit. I guess that's your goal for this interview.
I'll do my best.
Okay. Well, maybe we can start by asking about now officially a former Houston Astro, Framber Valdez. Was there ever any consideration of a reunion? If so, why not? Were the character concerns real, significant, overblown? How did that all play out?
I don't think there was ever a realistic chance Framber was going to come back to Houston. Maybe if they had not signed Tatsuya Imai and we had gotten to this point and the market had gone the way it did, maybe they could have gotten him on a shorter term deal with a lower AAV. I don't think Jim Crane would have ever paid him $40 million in a season, but I think it was time. I just think it was time for a fresh start for Framber. I think it was time for everyone to kind of go their separate ways. I know in saying that, it would seem to validate some of the character concerns that are out there, but I'll say this. You talk to his teammates and you talk to his coaches and you talk to the people in the organization that have been around him for his entire Astros tenure, and they love the guy. They constantly rave about his work ethic. One of the hardest workers on the team. If you look at the guy, you can tell like he doesn't miss a day in the gym. He doesn't miss a day working out. Like this is a large, strong man that it's not a situation where work ethic or any of that is in question. It's been well reported and well out there that, he has done a lot of work with sports psychologists in the Astros organization to get better at the mental side of the game. It was something that really, really bothered him the first few years of his big league career. He has gotten a lot better. Like he has made a lot of immense strides in that. And you can even watch it when he pitches. He does his breathing exercises. He'll come off the mound every now and then and like take a lap around the mound when things aren't going well for him. That's something that the sports psychologists kind of told him to do, just things to calm himself down on the mound. But I think it's impossible to look at how the market played out for him and how his free agency went. It's impossible to look at it and not think that the cross-up controversy with Cesar Salazar and just some other stuff too, because no one really talks about this, but a month before the cross-up stuff with Salazar, he threw his coaching staff under the bus unprompted about outfield positioning after one of his starts. So there's some stuff there. It's some stuff that, again, AJ Hinch knows him very well, managed him in 2018, 2019, had him in spring trainings even before that. I think he's going to a place with AJ's one of the better players, managers out there. He's got a psychology degree from Stanford. Like, he knows how to kind of get into people's minds. So I think Framber will do well in Detroit. And I think, for the Astros, he is probably one of the most underappreciated members of their golden era, a player development success story in every sense of the word, and someone that really helped them absorb the losses of Garrett Cole, Justin Verlander, Zach Greinke, Charlie Morton, like all these starters that they let go. Framber's durability and his effectiveness really, really helped offset those losses.
They had that big wave of starters depart, and then they've had other attrition since. And you mentioned one of the guys they're looking to sort of be a part of this new look Astros rotation in Imai. So I'm curious sort of what they saw in him and his performance in NPB that intrigued them, and also how they landed on what has become a very fashionable contract structure this offseason.
It was pretty clear that they went into the offseason with two directives. One was to obviously bolster the pitching staff. They knew that Framber Valdez was very likely not going to come back. They had so many injuries last year, and they had more injuries last year than most teams endure, but they just did not have the depth to maybe overcome it. They were using guys that from the minor leagues, they were using guys off the waiver wire that they would not have envisioned using that early in the season and throwing those sort of leverage innings. So that was the first part. The second part was that Jim Crane made it pretty known that he wanted to have a presence in Asia and the Pacific Rim. The ballpark was renamed Daikin Park last January. For those that are unaware, Daikin is an HVAC company located in Osaka, Japan. And through that partnership, Jim Crane took a couple of trips to Japan, and in one trip in particular, the Daikin executives kind of took him around, and him and the contingent around Japan, and he got to see with his own eyes kind of how the baseball setup was there, all the stadiums, everything. And he, from that day on, said, we're going to make a bigger investment here. They have scouts now in Seoul, South Korea. They have scouts in Taiwan, and they have scouts in Tokyo. They wanted to make an investment in the Asia Pacific Rim market. Now, I'm not sure that signing Tatsuya Imai is a result directly of that that investment of resources, because obviously Imai was well known. Like, the Astros didn't go find him like with their new scouts over there. Like, he was a very well known guy. But Jim Crane said it probably didn't help this contract, but it'll help in the future in terms of their investment in Asia and the Pacific Rim. So again, now all that being said, Jim Crane's never given a free agent deal longer than 5 years. He's never guaranteed any player more than $151 million on any contract. If you looked at all the pundits, the projections, MLB trade rumors, The Athletic, everybody that projected what Tatsuya Imai's contract was going to be at the beginning of the season, the Astros were never going to give him 8 for 190 or 6 for 170, which is what you kind of saw floating around there. But as the market began to not materialize, Scott Boras was very impressed with how the Astros handled Yusei Kikuchi at the 2024 trade deadline. He came over, pitched very well. They made a ton of adjustments with him. And Scott used that to, A, tell Tatsuya Imai that this is a place where he could thrive. And B, he knew as well that the Astros wanted to make this kind of mark in Asia. So it really kind of all fell into perfect harmony of they needed a deal when the market didn't manifest. Jim Crane is very, very amenable to doing the short-term high AAV deals, not $40 million for Framber Valdez, but $18 million with the opportunity to get it up to $21 million. He's perfect with that. So I think in a best case scenario for everyone, this is an 11-month pairing. Tatsuya Imai, well, if it all goes according to plan, he pitches very well. The Astros benefit from him pitching well. He opts out after the first year and goes and gets on the open market maybe the contract that a lot of people predicted he'd get this winter, and the contract that Jim Crane's always been loath to give.
You can make a pretty compelling case that the Astros missed out on a postseason appearance last year. I know everyone so sad not to see the Astros for once in the playoffs. Poor Astros, hard for them. But you could make a good case that it was the injuries that kept them out. Certainly Baseball Prospectus and also Dan Szymborski at FanGraphs late last year had them with the most projected WAR lost to injuries. What are they making of that, if anything? It doesn't have to mean more than just lousy luck in 1 year, but do they see it as something systemic? Are they trying to do anything differently? Is that having any effect on the WBC participation or non-participation of Jose Altuve and Carlos Correa?
The answer to all that is yes. They parted ways with their head athletic trainer, Jeremiah Randall, after the season. Jeremiah had been in that role for about 10 years. He had been here for a while. And it should be noted, when the Astros won the World Series in 2022, they were the healthiest team in baseball. They did a good job preventing injuries. And Jeremiah Randall ran the athletic training staff then too. So I don't think it's a situation where the trainer forgot how to practice medicine or the trainer forgot, everything he was taught. But it was clear that they had to do something different. Just the Yordan Alvarez saga was quite frankly, an embarrassment for them. Jake Myers testing out an injured calf in right field 5 hours before a random game in August, them clearing him to play, putting him in the lineup, and then he crumbles to the ground in pain, running out to his position to start the first inning. It was an embarrassing kind of scene for them. And some of it, too, was, I'll be honest with you, some of it was kind of self-inflicted PR mess. They hid behind a nonsensical or just untrue rule that trainers were not allowed to talk to the media due to CBA regulations, while there are at least 5 other teams that make their trainers available to media either in informal or on-record settings. The communication between the players and maybe the public, the communication from the staff to the coaches, there was a complete breakdown in every sense of it. So we have asked many, many times what other things they have changed this offseason. Dana Brown has said that they took a deep dive into their return to play procedure and that they've changed some things up. They have refused to reveal what those things are, but they do want you to know that they've changed some stuff. So I guess we'll all find out together what that is. Now, the interesting thing is you look at the WBC, like you mentioned, Jose Altuve and Carlos Correa will not play for Team Venezuela and Team Puerto Rico, respectively. It is true that neither of them received the insurance required on their contracts to play. That is true, and that is the foremost reason why they are not going to play. Carlos Correa told me at The Athletic a couple of weeks ago that Jim Crane called him and said that because the team had so many injuries last season, he would rather not have him risk that. He would rather have him in West Palm Beach getting ready for the season. And so that just goes to show that while insurance is a factor, Jim Crane was not keen on some of his guys playing in this tournament, which is fascinating given that the Astros are hosting a round of pool play with Team USA and then could have Team Puerto Rico, if they advance from their pool. Team Puerto Rico's quarterfinal would be at Dyken Park. So it's a very strange scenario. I can't for the life of me figure out why they would want, I can, it's money, but I can't why they would want to host this tournament so bad and then, actively try to prohibit their players from participating. Jeremy Pena is going to play for the Dominican Republic, so I guess they can point to that as saying we're going to let some guys play. But look, Carlos Correa's injury history is pretty well documented. Jose Altuve, the last time he played in the WBC, got hit by a pitch and missed the first month and a half of the season. It all goes hand in hand of, their rash of injuries and the absence of 2 pretty seismic figures in Latin American baseball.
Well, one guy who managed to stay healthy all of last year and to great effect was Hunter Brown, who took a step forward. He struck out more guys. He walked fewer guys. He gave up fewer home runs. He changed up his pitch mix a little bit. It all amounted to a 2.43 ERA, a FIP in the low 3s, and 4.5 wins by our reckoning. So what went right for Brown, and what are the team's expectations of him this year? Because he, at least as we have it constituted on the roster resource, depth charts, and you can tell me if I should tell Jason and John differently, but we have him as their number one starter. Tell us about Hunter Brown.
Oh, unquestioned number one starter. I think y'all are fully safe with that. It was funny. We just did a episode with Josh Miller, the pitching coach for Crush City Territory, and we were talking about Hunter. And everyone always brings up, he pitched, I believe, the third game last year, and they were playing the Mets. They opened with a series with the Mets. And the first inning of Hunter Brown's season, he faced Soto, Lindor, and Alonso. He hit 99, I believe, 4 times in the inning, struck out Soto and Lindor and made them look absolutely foolish while doing it. And it was like none of us had ever seen this out of him. Like my jaw was like on the floor watching this. And that it sounds so cliche, but that set the tone for his entire season. It was just a different kind of way the ball was coming out of his hand. He did a lot more mobility and movement and flexibility work last offseason to increase a little bit of his velocity, to move more efficiently down the mound. And I mean, you saw it. The four-seamer was up from 96 in 24 to 96.6 last year. I know that doesn't seem like much, but I mean, he was flirting with 100 when he was emptying the tank. I mean, he was throwing harder. He kind of shelved it's a kind of a hybrid slider cutter thing he throws. He kind of shelved that this past season and really kind of focused on the 2 fastballs, the 4-seam and the 2-seam. The 2-seam's obviously been really the key to his career. He implemented it in the middle of the 2024 season. And really you can kind of look at the date in which he implemented the 2-seamer in 2024. I believe it was like May 5th. And since May 5th, 2024, he's like second or third in all of baseball in like every starting pitching category. And I think only Skubal's ahead of him in most of them. So it's not a stretch to say since he added that sinker, he's been like the 3rd or 4th best pitcher in baseball. So it all came together for him. He had a full year of the sinker, the curveball. Look, I think they would like him and Josh even said this on our pod a little bit ago, they would probably like him to strike a few more guys out. Just given the stuff, you would think that he maybe could strike a few more guys out, maybe miss some more bats against right-handed hitters. So that they're tinkering with some stuff, but they don't want to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They would very much like a repeat of what he did last year. But I think it was also just a confidence thing too. Like you saw the confidence growing just start by start with him. Because I don't think a lot of people really appreciate like how close he was in 2024 to being sent to the minor leagues. Like in the middle of May, like the Astros were prepared to send him to AAA, and they had a roster thing happen to where they were going to delay it. And then he added the sinker like the next week. He actually did it. Well, his only relief appearance of that 2024 season was when he added the sinker. They noticed that, like, all right, we'll give him a couple more turns in the rotation, and the rest is history. So he is their unquestioned ace now. Just the confidence, the kind of bulldog mentality, he's got a presence on the mound that you did not see him have really at any point in his career. And I think as he kept stacking the good starts last year, it just really, really started to show out.
Well, while we're on the subject, I guess we can stick with the rotation here. So we talked about Brown, we talked about Imai. We might as well go through the rest. A couple of returning arms, Christian Javier and Lance McCullers Jr., who have made a total of, well, I didn't do the math quickly enough, but not enough starts for the Astros purposes. Only 15 for Javier over the past couple of years, and McCullers, of course, came back from missing multiple entire seasons to make 13 starts, 16 games last year. So the health, the outlook of those two, and then also two of the other big additions this offseason, Mike Burrows coming over from the Pirates in the 3-team trade, and Ryan Weiss coming back from Korea.
So they opened the season with 26 games in 28 days. So Joe Espada has already been pretty forthright. They're going to open the season in a 6-man rotation. Part of it because of that calendar. Part of it because Tatsuya Imai coming over from NPB. He pitched every 5th day in NPB. They want to make his transition easy. So they're going to open the season in a 6-man rotation. I would think heading into spring training, you can pretty much put in pen 4 guys in that rotation. And that would be Hunter Brown, Tatsuya Imai, Mike Burrows, and Christian Javier. You know, I think Christian Javier is the key to maybe their entire season, certainly the key to their rotation, maybe jumping from middle of the road to maybe a top 10 rotation in baseball. They started to see toward the end of last season with Christian Javier, they started to see some of the characteristics on the fastball return. They started to see a lot of like the movement and the data that they saw pre-surgery. They started to see that toward the end of last year, but by the time they started to see it, it was kind of too late. So, last year for Javier was really just get him back on the field, let him get into a rotation, let him pitch. I think he was 14 or 15 months post-op. I think we all understand that the first, handful of starts back from TJ, even the first, half a season back from TJ, it's tough, right? You don't get the immediate return to pre-injury form. So what they're banking on is he had a full healthy offseason, that they're going to get something closer to the 2022 version of Christian Javier this year. And if they get that, then they have a pretty formidable 1-2 of Hunter Brown and Christian Javier, because this was a guy in 2022, Christian Javier. He started a no-hitter in the World Series. He started a no-hitter at Yankee Stadium, was unhittable at times, and really kind of can be that high-end number 2 starter that they really don't have right now. So they need him. Mike Burrows was somebody they targeted pretty early on in the offseason. Stop me if you've heard this before, but they would like him to throw his sinker more. That is something that they have already communicated to him, that they would like him to use a sinker more. They like maybe the intangibles with him. They like kind of the competitiveness, kind of the tenacity on the mound. They think they can do some tinkers with some stuff with his secondaries, but given the prospect capital they gave up to acquire him, I'd be stunned if he was not in their season opening rotation. So you've got those 4 guys. You'd kind of have to say that Spencer Arrighetti and Lance McCullers probably have the upper hand going into camp, just off of, major league track record and experience, that they would have the upper hand for those final 2 spots. But make no mistake, like there's going to be some pretty legit competition for that 5th and 6th rotation spot. You mentioned Ryan Weiss. He's a guy that has, was very good in KBO last year, got signed with the Astros in no small part because he wanted to start. Like he has been very vocal that he wants to start. If he goes to West Palm Beach and pitches well, then he could certainly crack their rotation. They've got former Blue Jays prospect Nate Pearson. They signed him in October. They're going to stretch him out to be a starter as well. Maybe he could crack, maybe the back end of their rotation as well. They're going to give him a chance to do the same thing. They've got some prospects, some guys that made their debuts last year, AJ Blubaugh, maybe Miguel Ulloa. Jason Alexander's not a prospect, but he turned into like the best pitcher in the league for a month and a half randomly last year, just carried them in August. So they've got some options, but I think on track record alone, you probably look at Arrighetti and McCullers. And with McCullers specifically, because I know you guys asked about him, I have no idea what to expect, to be completely honest with you. He still can spin it very, very well. Like the spin has not gone away. He's still got the slider. It's one of the better sliders that's in the Astros system. He's got the curveball, obviously. The changeup's very good, but the velocity, he's always probably going to be now at 91 to 93 with the sinker. And I think in some ways he's kind of struggling a little bit of how to pitch with that decreased velocity. So he's in the last year of his 5-year, $85 million contract extension. They put him in the bullpen last year, and it was one of those instances where it didn't go well. He's not suited to be out there just in terms of being a long man. And when you talk about running a 6-man rotation out there with a shorthanded bullpen, you can't just put a guy in the bullpen and not use him. And that was pretty much what McCullers was towards the end of the year. So again, he's had a healthy offseason, his first healthy offseason in a very long time. I think his salary, I think his stature, and just what he's done in the org, what he's done in the league, I think they'll give him a chance to pitch in the rotation, see how it goes. But I don't know how long the leash is going to be on him, because there were times last year where it looked okay. He struck out like 13 guys facing the A's once. He went to Dodger Stadium and shut the Dodgers down. So it's in there, but there were way too many low efficiency games, way too many, 3 and 4 inning starts where he's walking the ballpark and just couldn't get outs. That I don't know how long that's going to be feasible this year if that occurs again.
I feel like every time we've talked to you about Jeremy Pena in the last couple of years, it's been, why hasn't this guy been able to like make good on the promise we saw in his rookie year that saw him win World Series MVP, right? He sure made good on it this past season. Just a dramatic step forward in production and value, still, a very strong fielder and was worth almost 6 wins, 135 WRC plus. I could go on and on about his batted ball characteristics. So what changed for Pena? What does he attribute this step forward to, and how permanent does it feel to you?
It feels pretty permanent to me because Meg, like we've said, and I think I said it on the last season preview episode too, like after 2022, if you looked at 23 and 24, like all of the underlying stuff kept getting better. Like he wasn't chasing as much. He wasn't hitting the ball on the ground as much. Like all of the stuff that you wanted to see get better was getting better. It just maybe wasn't translating into, the counting stats, into those results. But it's why it feels lasting to me, because he kept doing that this year and it just translated. He had the lowest ground ball rate of his career. He had the highest rate of pulling the ball in the air in his career. He's a right-handed hitter at Dyken Park, which means if you pull the ball in the air a good bit, you probably have a chance of getting it into the Crawford boxes, which he did on a good bit of occasions last year. He kept the ball off the ground. He destroyed fastballs last year, and fastballs had been a little bit of a struggle for him, especially four-seamers. When he was maybe not where he wanted to be, he was struggling against fastballs, and he was one of the best fastball hitters in the sport last year. So I think it's just a player that's coming into his own. It's a guy that, the makeup has never been the question. You kind of knew that if it all came together, he had that kind of superstar potential. And you saw it last year, if not for getting hit in the ribs by, I believe it was Cade Horton of the Cubs, hit him in the ribs with a pitch. If not for that, like he was on track to play 162 games, and he would have played 162 games last year. But you look at it, I mean, he made as much end zone contact last year as he did in 2024. But again, it was better contact. He was making better contact. His contact point was better. I think he stopped trying to because it seemed like every time he'd come to camp the last few years, he'd be doing something different with his swing. He'd be doing something different with how he handled the bat, how he wagged the bat, anything like that. And it finally just seemed like he went out there and played, and the results were pretty staggering. And it was a breakout season that a lot of fans kind of thought was coming in 2023, but it was a couple years late, but it was needed nonetheless.
There's been a lot of talk this winter about the rest of the infield and whether there might be moves, and so far there haven't really been. So how does all of that shake out? Jose Altuve back at second base after the left field experiment. You can tell us how that went and where it went wrong, maybe. And then also Christian Walker, who was just incredibly consistent during his past few seasons in Arizona, and then started extremely slowly, almost Jose Abreu style slowly, went the Astros, although he rebounded later in the season. And then you do have Correa, who his bat picked up a bit once he was back in Houston. So how does that all shake out, and where does Isaac Paredes fit in? And then if Altuve's back at second, then how do you figure out left field so that Jordan doesn't have to be out there? There's a lot of moving pieces here.
So you're just as confused as I am, Ben.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I just named all the positions and players just to literally cover the bases.
As long as you're just as confused as I am. I've had to address this so many different times. So let's think of the best way to guide people through this. This all became a problem because Carlos Correa is back. And the only reason Carlos Correa is back is because Isaac Paredes severely strained his hamstring running down the first base line in Seattle in last July. So they went into the trade deadline believing that Isaac Paredes was going to be out for the season, and they needed a third baseman. Carlos Correa became available. Carlos Correa only wanted to come back to Houston, and it turns out he's been wanting to switch to third base for the last 3 years. So the Astros were able to facilitate that, and he came back. For the end of last season, it was okay because Paredes came back toward the end, but he was only in a DH role. Alvarez was hurt, so they could make it work last year. But I think from the day they made the Correa trade, everyone was asking themselves, how is this going to work in 2026? And the answer that you kept getting was, oh, we'll figure that out when it gets here. Well, it's here, and I still don't think they figured it out. The two things that have been made very, very clear this offseason is that Jose Altuve is going to be the team's primary second baseman and that Yordan Alvarez is going to be the team's primary DH. Joe Espada has said that on at least 5 different occasions, asked every which way about it. He has been firm and resolute in that. He has told both players that that is their positions, and that is how they are going to spring training. They will both play some left field, but the majority of their time is going to come at those two positions. The only way that keeping all 5 of these guys on the roster was going to work is if the DH spot was truly open, is if Joe could use the DH spot and just cycle guys in and out, put Altuve in left some days, put Alvarez in left some days, and have the DH spot genuinely be an open slot to use guys. That's not going to be the case. There is not anyone in baseball that you talk to that believes Isaac Paredes can handle second base defensively on an everyday basis. He does not have great range. He does not move laterally very well. I will say he impressed the Astros with his defense at third base. He was much better than they thought he was going to be, but putting that at second base, it's just not going to work. Christian Walker has no defensive versatility other than playing first base, where he's won 3 Gold Gloves and he's a better first baseman than Isaac Paredes. Jeremy Pena is not coming off the field. Carlos Correa is not coming off the field. Unless you hand one of Walker or Paredes an outfield glove, which I don't think they're going to do, there's just not a path for regular at-bats for all of these guys. I'm sure they could make it work. I'm sure that there are ways they could make this work, but it's going to get really old just in terms of the distraction, in terms of this being talked about incessantly. You know, Isaac Paredes, his profile, his offensive profile is what the Astros lineup needs. He's perfect for Dyken Park, and he's such a patient hitter, and this is a lineup full of free swingers that they need him in the lineup every day. And right now, they can't figure out a way to do that. Christian Walker led the team in home runs last year. Very fun fact that Christian Walker led the Astros in home runs last year. He had an 800 OPS after the All-Star break. It's not as if he's unplayable. I know he came after Jose Abreu, so he gets lumped in with Abreu a lot, but this is not a Jose Abreu situation. Like he can be useful. He has value. They're going to have to trade one of Walker or Paredes. Like we're recording this on February 5th. I would be surprised if the Astros break camp with both Isaac Paredes and Christian Walker on the roster. It just doesn't seem like it's going to work, keeping all these guys happy, keeping them, you know, with the requisite amount of at-bats they need to stay locked in. It's a mess. And it's something that, you know, I know Dana Brown wants another left-handed hitting bat. He wants another left-handed hitting outfielder, which I think could address the left field vacancy. I think in order to get that, he's going to have to part with one of Paredes or Walker, but given what he wants in return, Paredes is the most valuable trade chip he has.
Where does Cam Smith fit into the picture for them? Because like one way to not have more of a logjam on the infield is turn infielders into outfielders. An experiment that seems to go fairly well for Smith. I mean, all things considered, but the bat sort of swooned. So where does he fit into their offensive picture? Because it was a feel-good story in the beginning, and then things kind of didn't materialize quite the way I imagine he wanted them to.
I think we can all agree that Cam Smith probably should not have been on the Astros major league roster for all 162 games last season. Whether that was, you know, ignoring him tearing up the Grapefruit League and starting him in the minor leagues and then bringing him up midseason, or whether that was demoting him in August when it was pretty clear that he had gotten overmatched by major league pitching. They had went out and acquired Jesus Sanchez from the Marlins because Cam had just not been producing. They had an alternative there. Not that Jesus Sanchez played well. He did not. But in hindsight, it does not seem like great roster management that Cam Smith was on the Astros major league roster the entire season last year. Nonetheless, he was. And now he is entering his second spring training with no guarantees of making the roster again. Dana Brown kind of surprised some people, I think both in the organization and out the organization, by saying at the GM meetings that Cam Smith is not guaranteed a roster spot going into spring training. He's going to have to prove himself a little bit. He's going to have to go out and, show that he has made adjustments, show that the bat and the offensive profile, he's made some adjustments in his swing and things like that. For a guy that was a third baseman until midway through his first big league spring training, he was a Gold Glove finalist in right field last year, lost it to Wilyer Abreu. He's pretty good in right field, like a very good defensive outfielder. So they've got that. They're going to give him some reps in center field in spring training just to see what it looks like. They had toyed with that idea last year when he was hitting well, just to give them some more flexibility. So you'll see him play some Grapefruit League games in center field, which I'm fascinated to see. But he's going to have to hit to make the roster. But the other thing is, if Cam Smith doesn't make the roster, then you're looking at Jesus Sanchez, who was pretty awful coming over from the Marlins at the deadline last year. You're looking at him as your everyday right fielder. You're maybe looking at Zach Cole, who came up out of nowhere in September and gave them a spark. They want to give him a lot of run in the outfield in spring training and hope he wins a spot. Maybe he's in left field. And then you have Jake Myers in center. The outfield is very cloudy right now. And again, I think if there is going to be a trade, of Paredes or Walker, I think an outfielder, a major league ready left-handed hitting outfielder, is going to come back in that deal. And I think then we'll have a little bit of clarity as to what's going on.
One more guy who got hurt last year to ask about. We could do that all day, but I'll end here with Josh Hader, who ended last season on the IL with a capsule sprain in his throwing shoulder, which he suffered a couple of weeks into August. Any concerns at all about him entering 2026?
No, everyone, Dana Brown and Joe Espada said he's had a fully healthy offseason. He's, throwing normal and they're ready. I do think we've probably seen the last of Josh Hader getting more than 3 outs in a game. I know he never did that before, but his first 2 years in Houston, he was very open in saying they invested in me, so I'm willing to go more than 3 outs, and he lived up to that. He was a lot more flexible in his usage. Last year, he pitched more than 1 inning on 7 different occasions. And interestingly enough, the shoulder capsule sprain happened after a 2-inning outing at Yankee Stadium in early August. Now, whether that was direct correlation, I'm sure we could debate that for days, but I do think you will see Hader function in a more traditional closer role of he's going to get the 9th inning. And, if it's still tied after the 9th inning, he's probably not going back out for the 10th. He's probably not going to come and get the last out of the 8th and then go get the final 3 outs in the 9th. I think you've probably seen the end of that again, unless maybe like they have a playoff spot on the line in the last week of the season, then you maybe see them change their tune a little bit. But I think, for most regular season games, you've probably seen the end of Josh Hader's multi-inning relief experience.
Are there any other guys down on the farm who you expect to get, reasonable big league time this year who fans should be familiar with?
I mentioned Zach Cole. He's a kid that, just one of a very classic Astros player development story. No one really knew who he was a very, very, he was a 10th round pick out of Ball State, 26-year-old kid, and just really got a lot of helium last year, hit everywhere in the minor leagues. They needed a spark in September. They brought him up, and then he hit a homer on the first pitch he saw in the big leagues. And it's a lot of power. It's a lot of left-handed power, but there's a lot of swing and miss. There's a lot of strikeouts. But the one thing that they like about him is he's fast, he's athletic, and he's young, which is something that this team does not have a lot of. Joe Espada has talked his entire managerial tenure about wanting an athletic team, about wanting team speed. And look, it helped last year that Pena had a 370 on base percentage because he's the fastest guy on the team. It helped that Jake Myers had a nice offensive season last year because he's the second fastest guy on the team. So you started to see a little bit of that manifest. They would like more of that. So I think you'll see Zach Cole get a lot of opportunities in spring training. They haven't come out and just outright said it, but they are begging him to win an outfield job in spring training. They are going to give him every opportunity to win the left field job in spring training. AJ Bluebaugh, who came up last year, came up for a spot start in May, but really flourished as a reliever down the stretch. I think he ended the season with like 22 consecutive scoreless innings. The stuff really plays up out of the bullpen. You know, he can get up to 97, 98 out of the bullpen when as a starter, he's usually like 93, 95. They're going to stretch him out going into camp, but I wouldn't be surprised if he, you know, contends for a role early in the season, probably not in the season opening rotation, but maybe as a swing guy, maybe as a reliever. But I would look at those two guys, and then maybe a little further down the road, if you're looking for the next Zach Cole, like a guy that comes out of nowhere, I'd point you to two guys, Joseph Sullivan and Lucas Spence. Lucas Spence is an undrafted free agent that they got a couple of years ago that just really, really hit last year, and they really like him. And then Joseph Sullivan's got an interesting family lineage. His grandfather is Pat Sullivan, who won the Heisman Trophy. I believe he played for TCU, but I could be wrong. He was a quarterback that won the Heisman Trophy. But he went to South Alabama, was a 7th rounder in the 2024 draft, a left-handed hitting outfielder, which they need more of, but he went to the fall league and really impressed, got up to AA last year, and they liked what they saw at him. Both Spence and Sullivan will be in big league camp, so maybe circle those names too for kind of maybe later on in the season.
We're going to get to our final question in a moment, but I think maybe as a lead into that, I'm curious, you know, what is your sense of how the organization understands itself? Like, where did they feel that they are from a competitive perspective? Because obviously last year was a step back from not only their usual excellence, but just the playoffs in general. And with time to reflect, you know, you got to see your hometown in October a lot more than you usually do, which I'm sure was lovely for you. But for the guys in the organization, where did they understand themselves to be? And sort of then Ben will ask his expectation questions, but anticipate that next.
I think the easiest way to describe it is like this. Dana Brown is in the last year of his contract as the general manager. Joe Espada is in the last year of his contract as the manager. Jim Crane was given an opportunity during the Tatsuya Imai's press conference, or after it, I should say. He was given an opportunity to like give them a vote of confidence and back them, and basically didn't. Just said, oh, like, we may explore extensions, but probably not. Like, they'll probably go to spring training like this. So the easiest way to explain it is they're all in for 2026 because the brain trusts of this organization, that's all they can look at. Neither of them are going into spring training with any guarantees that they'll be back after this season. And, you know, look, I'm here to tell you that it was not always guaranteed that they would be back for this season. There was really some speculation, and there were people in the organization that really did not know whether Jim Crane would retain these two guys for this season. Missing out on the playoffs did not sit well with him. So in terms of that aspect, like, they are very I don't even think they're thinking about kind of where they are in the grand scheme of like their organizational life cycle. They really are just thinking about 2026. And I think maybe that is instructive to maybe as we start to speculate where they are in their life cycle. Are they staving off just an entire kind of, I'm not saying tear it down to this. I don't think Jim Crane, as long as he owns the team, will ever tear this down to the studs. I don't think you will ever see a 2013, 2012 style Astros team again, as long as Jim Crane owns the team. But they've got a lot of questions, and they've got a lot of consequential decisions to make. You know, I'm looking at Jeremy Pena, who they were very close to getting a contract extension done with last year before he hired Scott Boras. If he plays well this year and goes into this coming offseason, that's the same parallel as to when they traded Kyle Tucker. So is Jeremy Pena on the trade block after this season if they can't come to an extension agreement with him? Jose Altuve is not getting any younger. He just had the worst statistical season of the last 10 years. You know, they've got him under contract for 5 more years. You know, you start to look at, there's a lot of stuff that's for the future that's very, very up in the air. And I'm not sure that, and the only reason I can't say, or I don't know where they stand, is that I'm not sure that the guys in charge now are going to be the ones making those decisions. So they're not really focused on it because they know that they've got to get to the playoffs this year, and they've got to make a pretty deep run if they want any, you know, hope of negotiating a new contract. So all that to say, like, the Astros are very much just focused on now. They're focused on 2026. They're focused on what can we do to get the 2026 Astros back into the playoffs, back into having a deep run in the playoffs, and get them back to where they were and where they've lived really for the past 8 years.
Well, I was all ready to dust off my closing question about what would constitute a successful season for the Astros this year, but you probably just addressed it. So make the playoffs, I guess, save people's jobs and answer some of these just overarching questions about the direction of the organization. It sounds like all of that's the to-do list for this year.
Yeah, I mean, that's really it. I mean, yes, like they've got to get back to the playoffs. Like, and again, we're talking about it as if like or I guess like there's this kind of inference as we're talking that like they're just this franchise in decline and it's like steadily going downhill. Like they finished last year with the same record as the Tigers and they lost in a tiebreaker. It's not as if like this team's hanging on for dear life and like is going to struggle to win 80, 83 games. Like Yordan Alvarez played 48 games last year. If he plays 58 games, they probably make the playoffs. And then who knows? You go into the playoffs last year with Valdez and Brown atop your rotation, you probably feel pretty good about what you could do. So I think last year it shook a lot of people because it's just stuff they're not accustomed to. They're not accustomed to not being in the playoffs. And, they had a lot of outside influences. The injuries really, really crippled them. There was some other stuff that was happening, but I think they've got to get back to the playoffs because if they get back to the playoffs, then that starts to answer some questions of, okay, Joe Espada, who I think is a pretty good manager, all things considered, I think is a pretty good tactician. He's a good in-game manager. Like that answers a lot of questions. Can he guide this team to the playoffs? They have not won a playoff game under Joe Espada. They were swept in the wild card series by the Tigers and then last year did not make the playoffs. So maybe that could help answer some questions about him. Dana Brown had to rebuild or really restock this pitching staff this offseason. If they pitch it as well as they're accustomed to pitching it, then that's a feather in his cap that he was able to go out, make the right moves and restock this pitching staff. So it all starts with making the playoffs. Like that's the baseline expectation here. And if they do that, then it'll allow them a little bit of freedom to start thinking about, maybe in a bigger picture, kind of what's next in the organizational life cycle.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Espada personally, but I was pretty impressed that they made it as close as they did last year because it was just running on fumes and smoke and mirrors there at the end of the season. They were just so shorthanded. But yeah, I guess it is that larger sense of, they had this kind of quasi-dynasty. And yes, we know about all the baggage associated with it, but there's been so much turnover in terms of the front office and everything that when you cited Zach Cole as kind of a classic Astros player development story, I always wonder, well, is that just institutional memory that they just sort of still have that process in place? Because the people who put that process in place for better in some cases, and also for worse, maybe in some, have departed and moved on. And the perception is that they're sort of old schoolish or more old school than they were. So I think they're tough for people to pin down just in terms of how they operate at a high level.
I'm glad you mentioned like the player development. Like, I don't know why I didn't mention this earlier. You mentioned like Zach Cole being the classic player development success story. He was a 10th round pick. The other thing that is going to be very seismic for the Astros this season, it is not a stretch to say that this upcoming draft may be the most important draft, at least of the last 10 years of this team. They're going to pick 17th overall, which is that's big for them because usually they're picking in the low 20s, even in the 30s, because again, they've been so good for so long, but they got a PPI pick from Hunter Brown finishing third in Cy Young voting. So that's the 28th overall pick. So they have the 17th pick, the 28th overall pick. They got a comp pick for Framber signing with the Tigers off a qualifying offer. So they're going to have a bigger bonus pool than they've probably ever had in the draft. They're going to pick higher in the draft than they have picked in a very long time. And they have a lot of picks early. That's another thing to keep an eye out on because this could be one of the more consequential drafts that this franchise has had since at least 2015 when they selected Alex Bregman and Kyle Tucker. So just do that again. Just select, Bregman and Tucker again, and then all the organizational life cycle questions answer themselves. But yes, I'll also keep an eye on that because the other thing that they have struggled to do to maybe sustain this, and part of it was they didn't have first and second round picks because of the sign stealing scandal, but they have really not hit on their early big dollar draft picks. Did you know that the Astros have not had a second round pick produced positive Major League B-WAR since Adrian Hauser? Like they have not done well with their expensive early draft selections. If they can kind of right that ship with maybe their last two draft classes and what they do in this draft, I think that'll go a long way too in determining kind of where this organization is life cycle wise.
Well, drafting a Tucker and Bregman equivalent would be a lot cheaper than re-signing them this winter would have been. So I assume that Jim Crane would prefer that. So we can add that to their goals for success this season. Do well in the draft or don't screw up the draft, and we'll be able to assess whether they achieve that in, 5-6 years. We'll check back in. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chandler. I think because we went so early, there might be more movement to come in Astros camp, but we did what we could knowing what we know now. And of course, people can read all of the additional developments at The Athletic and also listen to Chandler talk about them on Crush City territory. Well, I think you did your job. Solid PA. Thank you, Chandler.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Meg.
One preview segment down, 29 to go. We will be back in just a moment with Nick Piccoro to talk about the Arizona Diamondbacks.
The show is called Effectively Wild. It's about baseball and stats. We might meet a major leaguer, break down some funny at-bats. Effectively Wild. Effectively Wild.
Well, while we were talking to Chandler, the Arizona Diamondbacks made a trade. And doesn't this work out well because we have just the person to talk to about said trade. It's Nick Piccoro, Diamondbacks beat writer for the Arizona Republic and AZ Central Sports, who has traded in the birds in the backyard for dogs indoors in this preview segment. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, well, I hope that they pipe down, but I don't have a lot of faith in that happening.
It's okay. We're a dog-friendly podcast, though I do miss the birds. So I guess we can start with the news of the moment. The Diamondbacks traded Blaze Alexander to the Orioles. Whom did they get back, and why did they want to do this, as far as you can tell?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of information yet. We haven't gotten Mike Hazen on the phone to talk about it, but I know the Nolan Arenado acquisition made Blaze Alexander a little bit more expendable. I know they'd been looking pretty desperately for bullpen help. Obviously, Cade Stroud had some pretty good numbers last year in his first taste at the big league level, and his savant page is pretty impressive.
Arizona red.
Yeah, there you go. A lot of red. It's only 26 and a third innings. And, a lot of his other track record in the, as a professional is not as impressive. So I don't know. I don't know a ton about him, but, certainly he's going to fit somewhere in this bullpen that needs help. I kind of wonder if there's a little bit of a sell high on Blaze Alexander. He had a nice couple of months, but had some trouble sort of maintaining an approach and being a consistent player for long stretches prior to this. That said, I mean, he was a big part of kind of that story of the second half for them. They got a lot better defensively, a lot more athletic, and he was kind of in the middle of a lot of things. So an interesting deal. I want to hear more about it from what the club has to say about why they felt like it was the right deal for them.
Yeah, the way the Diamondbacks ended last season, I think, is a good place to go next because they made a lot of trades. They shipped out a lot of players, and then they got better. They came close to being the Tigers of 2025 compared to the Tigers of 2024, that is, in that they were sort of sellers and then perhaps came to regret that? I guess that's my question. Not that they could have or should have anticipated that necessarily. They also had a lot of injuries, kind of a common theme on this episode. But given the way it all worked out, do you think that they had any second thoughts? Not that if they had held on to everyone, everything would have worked out exactly the same way, but it's hard not to look at where they finished in the standings and say, if we had perhaps held on to some guys, you never know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's natural to wonder that. I think probably the thing that I keep coming back to is the fact that it was more a Mets collapse than it was a, really, really strong second half by the Diamondbacks. I mean, they went 29 and 24 after the deadline. Like, they were good, but they weren't the Tigers quite, they weren't quite that good.
Yeah.
I think they just had to do it. I think the position they were in as far back as they were, as many teams that they had to leapfrog, it just was really unlikely that it would happen. And as it turned out, I guess, it kind of bared that out, right? The end results. But you never know what it would have looked like if they'd have kept Naylor and Merrill Kelly and Suarez. I do think that they saw it as a chance to add some much needed pitching depth to their system, which they did. So I think that they look a little bit better on paper going into this year as a result.
Well, let's see if I can work an awkward transition into a guy who has remained on the team then. One guy they didn't trade at the deadline or this offseason was Ketel Marte. Did that work? I don't know. I'm curious how close they actually came to moving Marte and what ultimately made them make the decision that they were just going to move on from that as a potential roster construction move.
I don't think they really came all that close. I don't think that the offers were there. I just think it wound up being one of those things where he's just such a good player, they weren't going to take anything less than an A+ type of trade return. I think they figured that might be out there coming off of the couple of seasons that he'd come off of, and the fact that his contract is going to be hundreds of millions of dollars, or at the time was going to be hundreds of millions less than what some of the bigger free agents on the market were expected to get. It seemed reasonable to think that now would be a good time to do it. But for whatever reason, I don't know exactly what it was, whether it was, concerns about his defense, his age, clubhouse makeup issues, or what. Those offers didn't materialize. It did make sense in a sense. Just again, like another opportunity to just get younger and get more pitching. Like, this organization has really struggled to develop arms. And if this was a way to do it, you can kind of see the logic in it.
The dog collar jangling, I think, is actually a nice sort of replacement for the bird song.
A very intense game of, we call it chomp, going on here, where they are just going back and forth at each other. It's a lot of fun. They're going to start barking pretty soon, though.
Well, I like what we're hearing so far. You're always going to get some sort of wildlife with a Nick Piccoro call, or I guess domesticated life in this case. So maybe we can stick in the infield then, and we can talk about the golden oldies who have been imported here. Or I guess the Diamondbacks hope that they'll be golden. Nolan Arenado, you mentioned. And also the Diamondbacks obliged by acquiring Carlos Santana just under the wire so that we could talk about that signing too. So I guess we'll also want to ask about what all of this means for Jordan Lawler and where and when he fits in. But maybe we can just talk about those two and what the Diamondbacks think they have left in the tank.
Well, we haven't gotten, official word on Santana yet, so I don't have on the record type of remarks of it, of what they're thinking about that. I do think that both of those acquisitions seem similar in the sense that they're both above average defenders, and I think that they are trying to do everything they can to help their pitching staff. They weren't able to, upgrade it significantly, I would say, this offseason. They didn't add a closer. They didn't add, other than Merrill Kelly, they added Michael Soroka, who's fine, but it's not like they made big difference-making additions to their pitching staff. So I think they're just trying to help those guys out as best they can. And if you look at what happened in the second half, part of the reason why they were playing better baseball was they were just a more fundamentally sound team. They were just playing cleaner baseball. Naylor and Eugenio Suarez are not great defenders. And, they wound up, Blaze played a great third base over the last couple months of the season. You'd think Arenado still can. And, we'll see exactly how much playing time Santana gets. But, on paper, it seems like he's a better option defensively than anybody else that they have. So I think that's really what it probably came down to with both those guys. And I think they're just going to be banking on, these top four guys in this lineup, Carroll, Perdomo, Ketel, Gabby Moreno can kind of shoulder the load offensively.
I would submit that there are few things that are more satisfying for fans than when a guy signs an extension during the offseason and then immediately turns in his best season as a pro. Best season as a pro sort of undersells the kind of year that Perdomo had. So talk to us about what changed for him, what sort of keyed this big step forward. And I'll ask you a question that I asked Chandler as it pertains to Jeremy Pena. How permanent does this shift feel to you?
That's a hard one. The last part, especially, because it just felt so unlike anything we'd seen from him before. I do think that the floor is really high with him. Obviously a solid defender and a guy that just is one of the best in baseball at pitch recognition, zone awareness, just working tough at bats over and over and over, just never seems to give an at bat away. So, you like those things as far as the floor. I don't know. He got a lot stronger. That's for sure. He seemed to figure out how to drive balls to the pull side better, even right-handed, which, we just hadn't seen him hit balls with authority from that side of the plate very much. I feel like he's kind of the classic guy who knows how to hit, knows how to put the bat on the ball, made a few adjustments, and power came late, right? That's kind of the cliche of what you'd say with him. I guess I think it's probably repeatable. I don't know if he's going to get to 20 homers and 100 RBIs again. But I think something in that neighborhood of 50, 60 extra base hits, and is still pretty young. That was his age 25 season. There's a lot to like.
So with Perdomo ensconced at short for the foreseeable future, where will Jordan Lawler end up? It's just follow the bouncing baseball player because he's just all over the place. He was playing some second. He was playing some third. He was in the DR playing some center field over this offseason, right? So where will he end up, or is the plan for him not to pick a lane, but just to bounce around?
I wonder if the plan for him has changed yet again. After the Arenado deal, it sounded like they were moving forward thinking that Blaze would be, kind of the backup on the infield positions. Lawler would be an option there, but also was going to get a lot of reps in the outfield. I don't know how much that's going to change now. They think that Lawler can play a good outfield. They think he can, he's athletic enough and will be just fine out there. But I don't know. They also have Ryan Waldschmidt, who I expect them to give an opportunity to this spring. So I don't know. I don't have a great answer for you. I will say I thought that something clicked for him those last few weeks of the season. I feel like he just suddenly got comfortable. It is September, and you're never really supposed to read too much into September results, but just the quality of the at-bats and the fact that he was, really hitting balls hard and pulling them with some authority. Maybe hopeful that upside that people have been talking about, might actually come out here in the future.
He's finally graduated from prospect status, which is really all that I care about.
Same here. Yeah.
I don't have to list him on the D-backs list anymore. This time last year, when we were talking to you about Corbin Carroll, a lot of attention was paid to sort of the dramatic splits that he had, the swoon in the first half, the rebound in the second. And last year was pretty steady Eddie. He was a great player. He was good at the plate. He didn't have the protracted sort of downswing. So what do you attribute that to with Carroll? And sort of, you've mentioned that he's meant to help shoulder the offensive load. Do you think that he's in a spot where he's sort of equal to that challenge, I suppose?
Yeah, I think his swing was in a better place. Remember he came into 2024 having made some adjustments that kind of backfired on him. I know he went to Driveline after last year and just seemed really happy with where he was from a swing perspective from the first day of spring training on. And just delivered. I haven't had a chance to catch up with him yet. We haven't, spring hasn't started yet. But I'm curious what he's taking aim at this year. I'm guessing it's the fact that he hit 259 and that he'd like to be something closer to a 300 hitter. This is a kid that wants to win the MVP. That's the kind of mentality he has. And yeah, I feel like he has the ability to totally shoulder the bulk of the heavy lifting for the offense. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up stealing more bases. A lot of that last year was where he was hitting in the lineup and just how good Cattell was hitting right behind him. I think if he finds himself, in the position to steal more, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up back at 50 steals again this year.
You made a reference to Gabby Moreno shouldering a heavier load. I'm sure he'd like to. I'm sure the Diamondbacks would like him to. I had to rank the top 10 catchers going into this year recently for MLB Network. And so I had Moreno quite high. And that was partly because if you just look on a rate basis, just among all players with 500 plus plate appearances as a catcher over the past 2 seasons, the only catcher who has a higher WAR per 600 plate appearances over that span is Cal Raleigh, which sounds really good for Moreno, except that I guess he barely had 600 plate appearances in those seasons because he just kind of is stuck in this rut where he's getting hurt and plays half a season. So yeah, if you just kind of double his WARs, then it looks really good, but he would have to actually stay healthy all season for that to happen. So I guess it's a bunch of different injuries. So it isn't exactly one thing, right? So is that the reason for optimism, or what is the level of optimism?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, what was it in 23? I think it was a shoulder. He missed time in the middle of the season. In 24, he pulled a quad or something running down to first base in Cleveland. And then last year, it was like a broken bone in his hand. It's weird. I mean, it's not one specific thing, and it's some sort of fluky stuff, I guess. He went into last spring talking about how important it was for him to stay healthy and how he had learned what he needed to do to take care of his body. And, I guess to his credit, it was like a wild pitch when he was behind the plate, right? That kicked up and hit his throwing hand, I think.
Wasn't that after the long rain delay in Cincy or somewhere?
Might have been. That sounds right. Yeah. I remember it happened and I wasn't there for it, but I think it was that road trip. I don't know. It's also weird. Every time he comes back, it seems like he just catches fire in the second half and just, makes you wonder what could have been with his season. I don't know. I mean, I know he takes it seriously. I know the club takes it seriously. Maybe they just have to cross their fingers and hope for a little better luck.
I'm curious, you already mentioned Waldschmidt. This is a team that has a very deep farm system. On the position player side, are there guys in the high minors who you anticipate might be sort of first called up in the event of injury?
I think Tommy Troy and Ryan Waldschmidt, assuming Lawler's going to be on the team, those are probably the guys that stand out to me. Trying to think who else I would be omitting there. Like Crisantes, I guess I wouldn't be surprised if Crisantes just mashed and was an option later in the year. But Waldschmidt and Troy are probably the two that make the most sense. Gino Groover, I suppose, is another option. I'm curious to see, how aggressive they are with Waldschmidt. He had a tiny chase rate, a lot of contact, just does a lot of the things that they want to see out of their hitters. Just a more advanced approach than you would expect for a guy in his first full pro season, even a college guy. He was just really, everything was really on point. And with Gurriel, likely to miss the first couple months at least as he's recovering from his knee surgery, that's an opportunity right there in left field. I'm not sure how much they would factor in the, PPE. Waldschmidt is a top 100 guy. It'll be interesting to see just how much of an opportunity he gets when camp starts.
Yeah, PPE is, I guess, a remnant of the COVID era, right? That's like
PPI.
the personal protective
PPI,
equipment.
bad,
PPI,
yes.
That's the one. Both are important in their own way. Yeah, the outfield, we talked about Corbin Carroll, and that's solid, but the rest of the outfield is a little bit of a mystery, right? A little bit of a black box, probably.
I mean, Alec Thomas is probably entrenched there in center field, although I wouldn't be surprised if he finds himself in a platoon with someone. I thought, that there was more of a chance that it was going to be with Lawler, before that trade of Blaze. Maybe it still is. Tim Tawa is another guy that could find himself in the middle of all this stuff. He's a really versatile player who hit pretty well in Reno a couple of years ago and had some stretches of success in the big leagues, especially early last season. And who am I forgetting? Well, Jorge Barosa is another guy that adds some, defense and speed. Pavin Smith days in the outfield are probably over. I think that's probably most of the names that you're looking at least guys that are on the 40.
We can talk a little bit of pitching here. The Diamondbacks bullpen, not so hot last year, was 28th by FanGraphs, WAR 29th by win probability added. What have they done to rebuild that bullpen?
Not an awful lot. Today they got Cade Stroud, as we talked about.
Yeah.
They signed Taylor Clark to a modest 1-year contract. And I think they're really just going to be hoping for bounce backs from a lot of guys and good health from others. They need to get AJ Puck and Justin Martinez back and healthy, and are hoping that happens, as the year goes on. Puck will be back first, and both are coming back from, the repeated elbow surgeries, or multiple elbow surgeries for each of them, maybe makes it a little bit scarier. But, they're hoping, Kevin Ginkel is healthy and better, and that Ryan Thompson is more consistent, and, guys like Dre Jameson can stay healthy and contribute, and that Juan Murillo, who emerged last year throwing 100 for them and had some moments, can be a little bit more consistent. And there's others as well. But, yeah, I mean, it's an area I think all of us were expecting them to address in a more significant manner this offseason. They were linked to a handful of free agent relievers, but didn't get a deal done with anyone. I think there's just going to be a lot of attention on the bullpen, certainly early in the season. As a result, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Torey Lovullo as well. There were questions as to whether he was going to be coming back at the end of last season. And it feels like a tough spot for him to be in. Just, obviously a manager is evaluated by most fans as how he, based on how well they handle the pitching staff. And he's going to be bringing back a bullpen that's filled with a lot of the same guys that, struggled last year. So it's an interesting spot for him to be in, especially early on when they have a tough schedule.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that because they made a bunch of changes to that staff beyond, just moving on from Strom. So obviously the results weren't particularly sterling, largely because of injury. But, a year into a new sort of organizational approach to pitching, do they see that as having borne any fruit? Or do you imagine that some of those guys might be sort of on the hot seat too?
I mean, it's an area of focus in the organization. They just added Jeremy Bleich to their front office to kind of help overhaul their whole kind of pitching development infrastructure. I wrote a story early in the offseason about how they were thinking about making changes to their kind of the way that they push their young pitchers in like strength and conditioning. They're usually near the bottom of the league in velocity and stuff plus and all that. And I mean, they just have had a really hard time developing the sort of, impact bullpen arms that a lot of organizations seem to almost like stumble upon these days. The Diamondbacks just haven't done it very well. Yeah, I mean, I'm really curious to see what kind of changes they're able to implement, whether any guys internally can take, just steps forward, gain velocity or get a little nastier. It's been amazing, to be honest. Like looking back at the history of the franchise, like bullpen development has always been a problem. They've always had to go externally, almost always had to go externally to solve their issues there. And it's kind of amazing in a sense that they've been as competitive and relatively successful of an organization as they have been, despite having this glaring weakness for pretty much the history of the franchise.
One other fellow returning from an elbow surgery we should probably touch on, or Diamondbacks hope he'll be returning from an elbow surgery, Corbin Burns. What's his time frame like?
He is expected back sometime around the All-Star break, or that's when he has been talking about. I would think if it's a little more conservative, it would be closer to August than the beginning of July. That's another one that's going to be a big lift. It's just things have not worked out from a pitching perspective. I don't know how many times I can say that, but looking at it a couple of years ago, they knew that Gallen and Kelly were, that their time was was running out, and they went and signed Eduardo Rodriguez, and then a year later they signed Corbin Burns, and in hopes of kind of, shielding themselves a little bit from those departures. And it just has not worked out. Eduardo had a little better second half. His last, 6 weeks or so were pretty solid, but otherwise it just has not gone well for him here. And Corbin Burns threw great, of course, before going down, but yeah, I mean, that's not what they had in mind when they signed him.
You just mentioned Gallen. He is still out there. He is probably the top-ranked free agent who is still on the market. Is there any prospect of or need for a reunion?
I mean, I'm sure they could use him. Mm-hmm. I don't get the sense that it's extremely likely, but those things can change quickly. And, just as quickly as Ken Kendrick can change his mind and decide he wants to spend a little bit more money. That said, I mean, they spent a couple $100 million last year, more than anyone expected, and they lost apparently a lot of money last year when things didn't go well. I don't know. I mean, the longer that Gallen is out there, the more you wonder if he is going to come back. It wouldn't. I mean, I guess it would kind of cost them a draft pick, but not in the same way. So it is a little bit easier to envision them bringing him back. And obviously, Gallen has made no secret. He loves it here. He just got married to someone who is from here. They live out here full time now. He wants to stay. He's always wanted to stay in Arizona. Whether they're going to stretch their payroll that much more remains to be seen. I guess I just kind of doubt it.
Their rotation as it stands now is Kelly back. At least you got the steady Eddie of Merrill Kelly. You have Eduardo Rodriguez, as you mentioned. What are they expecting out of Brandon Pfaadt this year?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I have him on, targeted as a guy I really want to talk to and kind of dig in on once camp begins. Certainly, they think he's going to bounce back. I don't know what direction they're going to go with him. I mean, he's tinkered pretty dramatically at times over the years with his repertoire. He's added a sinker, started throwing a cutter, backed away from his slider or sweeper, as it's categorized as at times, versus certain handed batters. I'm curious to see what, again, it's one of those things that I wonder if Jeremy Bleich's impact will maybe be seen or felt there as it pertains to Pfaadt. But you mentioned a guy that in Perdomo that they extended and then immediately had it go great. It kind of went the opposite when they signed Pfaadt. I think they gave him that deal expecting a breakout, and it kind of went the other direction.
I think we asked you on last year's preview about the ballpark situation, and there had been noises about maybe moving the team at one point, and there were some needed renovations. And there was some resolution last year when a big $1 billion+ 30-year funding plan was signed. And I wonder whether that is already manifesting itself, whether fans will start to see that, what sort of economic impact that will have.
I think there's still a little ways to go for all of that stuff to kick in. I know they've had some meetings and trying to figure out exactly what things they're going to renovate. And there's just a lot of layers that those sorts of boards that they have to go through with all that stuff. And I think they still need a lease. They need to sign a new lease for the ballpark as well. They talked about a lot of the things that are going to happen first might be things that fans aren't going to really see. Maybe that's like, kind of some of the infrastructure type of stuff. And it could be some of the, like clubhouse level things to make things a little bit better for both the home and the visiting side. So it doesn't sound like they've made an awful lot of progress yet on Chase Field.
All right. Tell us what would constitute success for the Diamondbacks in 2026.
That's a hard one for me because of all of the injuries, namely Burns and Puck and Martinez. If those three guys were healthy to start the year, I think you would absolutely say that getting to the playoffs would be expected. I guess I would say playing well enough to where you're adding at the deadline and then adding those guys back in the second half, that would probably be good. But it's a little tough to look at the at the pitching staff as currently constructed and expect, and then you add in the Gurriel injury on top of that and expect them to be being a no doubt playoff team. So, I think hanging in there and just buying at the deadline would probably check that box for me. I don't know if that's the case for the organization and for ownership. This was a team that was in the World Series a couple years ago, and they've missed the playoffs back-to-back years, had a pretty good team in 2024 and couldn't make it happen. Last year dealt with a lot of injuries, and you can excuse it a little bit more, and then obviously had to sell at the deadline or felt they had to. But you start missing the playoffs again, you kind of wonder how long ownership is going to remain patient there. So there's a lot to watch this year.
And you hope you don't just get a reverse of last season where they buy at the deadline and then play worse down the stretch. That could always happen because it's baseball. Anyway, thank you, as always, Nick. It's a pleasure having you on. And thank you to your dogs for not chomping too loudly.
Yeah, shocker, right? Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
All right. I led the last episode by talking about MLB owners' somewhat surprising absence from the Epstein files. Did get an email after the episode from Patreon supporter Vicky, who said, just an FYI in regard to baseball owners and Epstein, brings me no pleasure to say this as a Dodgers fan, but one of our owners is implicated. Vicky's referring to Todd Bowley, who was mentioned in a couple of Epstein emails. Epstein was trying to arrange meetings with him. I think they had a couple business meetings. As I said to Vicky, by the standards of rich guys embroiled in the Epstein emails, these details don't seem too damning. Not great to have any association with the guy at that stage, obviously, but look at what we're comparing him to. Also, he's not a well-known figure in baseball. He is a minority owner of the Dodgers and the Lakers. He is better known as the co-controlling owner and chairman of Chelsea in the Premier League. He's a co-owner of multiple soccer clubs, so he's more associated with soccer than with baseball, and it could have been way worse. So as Vicky responded, yes, he was just immoral rich guy more than creepy predator rich guy. After we recorded, ESPN reported on a court filing pertaining to the Emmanuel Clase pitch fixing case. Luis Ortiz's attorney requested that his client's case be severed from Clase's because the two pitchers' markedly different levels of culpability would make it difficult for Ortiz to receive a fair trial. And this was the juicy part. The attorney alluded to government allegations against Clase of, and I quote, suspect pitches during 48 games, which is many more than the government detailed in its initial indictment and would be more than a quarter of games Clase appeared in during his, quote, 26 months of alleged criminal conduct from May 2023 through July 2025. So, that's not good. We don't yet have additional detail on those 48 pitches. This reminds me, though, I neglected to mention that the piece I wrote about the pitch fixing scandal and discussed on the podcast was nominated for a Sabre Analytics Conference Research Award in the Contemporary Commentary category. And if you're listening to this before the end of the day on Friday, February 6th, you can still vote for that if you'd care to, or vote for any of the other excellent nominees. If you feel like throwing a vote my way, I would not complain, so I will include that link on the show page. Also, since we started this episode by talking about a couple of left-handed Detroit Tigers aces, I'll end with a quick salute to one we just lost. Mickey Lolich, Tigers legend, died at 85 this week. Most famous for his heroic performances, MVP performance in the 1968 World Series, the last World Series before the divisional era when extra rounds were added. But he was also an excellent pitcher, very much in the vein of Wilbur Wood, whom we talked about recently when we lost him. So losing legends of the 70s and 60s. And I read Lolich's name when we talked about Wood, because when I sorted the innings pitched leaderboard, 1971 to 75, Wilbur Wood was on top, Gaylord Perry was second, but then Lolich was third, with 1,560 and 2/3 innings pitched over those 5 seasons. So a knuckleballer, a spitballer, and Mickey Lolich. And he wasn't just an innings eater. During that span, he had a second place and third place Cy Young finish. He got MVP votes. In 71, Lolich actually led the majors with 376 innings pitched and 45 games started and 29 complete games. We will not see their like again, barring big-time rules changes. So a couple of incredibly durable lefties. I referred to Energizer Framber before. Forget Energizer Framber, Energizer Wilbur and Mickey, except that no one can keep going going forever. They were going and going, and now they're gone, but not forgotten. If all goes according to plan, we will have Giants and Royals previews for you next time. For now, you can support the podcast on Patreon by going to patreon.com/effectivelywild and signing up to pledge some monthly or yearly amount to help keep the podcast going, help us stay ad-free, and get yourself access to some perks. As have the following 5 listeners: MP, Robbie Simpson, Robbie Sensor, Hokius, or Hokias, and Austin Hall. Thanks to all of you. Patreon perks include access to the Effectively Wild Discord group for patrons only, monthly bonus episodes, playoff live streams, prioritized email answers, shoutouts at the end of episodes, potential podcast appearances, personalized messages, discounts on merch, and ad-free FanGraphs memberships, and so much more. Check out all the offerings at patreon.com/effectivelywild. If you are a Patreon supporter, you can message us through the Patreon site. If not, you can contact us via email. Send your questions, comments, intro and outro themes to podcast@fangraphs.com. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Effectively Wild on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and other podcast platforms. That's another way you can help us without spending a dime. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/effectivelywild. You can find the Effectively Wild subreddit at r/effectivelywild, and you can check the show notes in the podcast post at FanGraphs or the episode description in your podcast app for links to the stories and stats we cited today. Thanks to Shane McKeon for his editing and production assistance. We'll be back with one more episode before the end of the week, which means we will talk to you soon.
Does baseball look the same to you as it does to me? When we look at baseball, how much do we see? Well, the curveballs bend and the home runs fly. More to the game than meets the eye. To get the stats compiled and the stories filed, fans on the internet might get riled, but we can break it down on Effectively Wild.